All right, so that ridiculous field of non-stop solar explosive nonsense is the focus of today's build. So this is my very oldest build that I've had. Obviously, we've tweaked over time with different mods and things that have popped into the game and weapons. But this is my base, oldest build with the very first piece of exotic armor I ever got. And all these years later, this build is still excellent. So that's the gameplay. If you're a longtime Warlock main, you probably already know what this is, but maybe you don't know the best way to kind of put it together to make it as useful as possible. The centric piece is the old Sunbracers exotic Warlock gauntlets. So the key to these are it increases the duration of solar grenades. So you have to pick the solar grenade as your grenade subclass. It only works with those. And it tells you right there, solar melee kills grant unlimited solar grenade energy for a brief time. That brief time window is enough to throw 4 or 5 grenades if you're spamming them nonstop. So basically what happens is you get a kill with a solar melee. You could kill them outright if it's an easy red bar enemy, or you could damage them with your weapon, then finish them off with a melee. As soon as the melee kill is converted, you get unlimited solar grenades for X amount of time. It's like 4, 5, 6 seconds. And a place on the moon or any other gameplay mode where there's a bunch of ads kind of show just how strong this is. Frankly, the build that I have on this is kind of the easiest way to set it up. There's some more involved higher spec builds where you can kind of tie in the Phoenix dive and go for health regeneration kind of in the mix. But this one works well. This is the build that I utilized to get past the solo. Gosh, I forgot the name of the quest. But the newest exotic quest with the exotic glaive. I still have it on my person here. The Vexcalibur. That quest. I did that solo. This is the build that I used to get past it as a solo player. That was also very, very challenging, but it is doable. So this is the key to the build. Outside of that, it honestly doesn't really matter. If I scroll through my pieces, you'll notice I focus on 2 things. Resilience and getting the melee back quicker. I don't have grenade energy because the melee, solar melee kills throw you infinite grenades. So what you want is your melee ability to come back as quickly as possible. I've got it on a 47 or 53 second timer. At 88, it would drop to 47, drop 5 more seconds if I got this up to 90, but it's close enough, it doesn't really matter, and it will keep coming up and keep coming up. And of course, I have things tied into this for fire sprites to get me back more ability energy as I'm killing things with this build. You'll see yet again, this is another build where I'm using Osteostriga. Osteostriga works quite well just at ad clear, so it's a good thing to pair into this build. My backup is a crafted Amit AR2 with the higher spec incandescent. That works quite well. I'm also still a very big fan of Sunshot. But for the easiest version of this build, Osteostriga, I think, is probably the simplest way to achieve your results. And then I've got double solar weapons, though it doesn't really matter what you throw in these other slots. The key to the build is this. So long as you're proccing this, the rest of the build falls into place. So let's jump into the actual subclass setup. I've got my Healing Rift, I've got my Burst Glide. For a higher spec version, you could use Phoenix Dive, but that's another build for another day. It's a bit more involved. This is the simplest way to use the build, and it's the one I would recommend for most people. I have the Incinerator Snap. You could always go back to the old school Celestial Fire. They both do the same thing. It's just a solar ranged melee ability. This has a wider arc. This is more direct single target. And then, of course, our solar grenade is the key because that's what functions with the Sunbracers exotic gauntlet. So for our aspects, I have on Icarus Dash on this build. That gives you the in-air dash ability to get out of harm's way. You could use the opposite. You could use the heat rises if you want, but because I want to be actually using my grenades, not to use them as a means to go airborne, that's kind of the setup I have here. Though because you get infinite once you proc the gauntlets, this actually is a viable option. Again, this is one that I think pairs better with, say, Phoenix Dive build. It's a bit higher spec. It takes a bit more practice. This is kind of the bottom floor, easiest way to get this build going that you're going to see great success out of the box. The next one, of course, is Touch of Flame. That gives our grenades of any type enhanced functionality on this build. We have to use solar grenades, so it tells you it increases the linger duration and they periodically emit blobs of lava around their perimeter. Yes, they do. That's a welcome new change as of within the last give or take 12 months of Destiny play. A very welcome addition to that grenade that makes it all the more powerful. I stick with Well of Radiance because it is unquestionably the best super in the game. As a solo player, it's invaluable. Coming down to my fragments, the first we have is Ember of Searing. Defeating scorched targets gives you melee energy back and creates a fire spite, and you'll see it gives us plus 10 recovery, which is always nice. So Scorched. Scorch is the target is singed by destructive solar light, taking damage over time. Scorch damage increases as the target gets more scorch stacks. After enough stacks are applied, they ignite. Then it tells you Ignition. Creates a large solar explosion, deals damage in an AoE, and also stuns unstoppables. And then the fire sprites, those are the fire version of the energy recovery system in the game. So it gives you grenade energy back. So we want to be making fire sprites and we want to be scorching, which is why I have my crafted Amit, which is very, very good for dumping tons of fire sprites all over. Because of incandescent, it ignites and scorches, and then it just chain reacts. So you can kind of run with just non-stop uptime on this build. I was mostly focusing the Osteo in that gameplay, but if I had used the Amit, you would have seen that it came back even quicker than it already did on this. So you can see you have a lot of leeway with this build. Doesn't really matter what you want to use, but just be mindful of these solar-based elements that you want to be proccing as often as possible to keep this uptime going. Next is Ember of Ashes. You apply more Scorch stats to targets. So as you have anything that applies Scorch, this is going to amplify it. Scorch and Ignition we already looked at, so we already know what those do. The next one is Ember of Char. Solar Ignitions spread Scorch to affected targets. That gives us plus 10 discipline. Don't really need it, but it's nice to have. So Ignition, Scorch explosions deal damage and do the unstoppable. So really it's focusing the AoE spread capabilities of the background pieces that go into this build. Then finally, Ember of Blistering. Defeating targets with solar ignitions gives you grenade energy. So because we're bringing these fire sprites into play to get back our already quickly recharging melee ability, the extra fragments over here that will give us more energy back will allow us to throw grenades in the interim to deal more side damage, to get more fire sprites, to pump more back into the melee. So it all just fully synergizes. So this is basically a feedback loop for getting energy back into the build to be able to constantly keep throwing our charged melee to kill enemies and get the unlimited 4 or 5 solar grenade throws at a time. That is the build. There's a few different fragments that also work well depending on your setup, depending on what weapons you're going to use, and kind of your general play style. But this is a pretty straightforward, easy method of accomplishing the simplest path to having this build function really, really well. Like I said, I use Osteo, though if you do use something that has greater scorch capability, like my crafted Emmet over here with this incandescent, yeah, it really does an even better number. So you would have seen this energy and fire sprite drop even quicker than what it already did in that quick little gameplay video. But this is the build, guys. It's an oldie but a goldie, and if anything, it's just gotten better over time with all the updates to the mods and kind of our feedback loop here. I mean, it doesn't really matter what you throw in. I throw in things that give me back melee and grenades, so they're feeding into one another and focusing on, you know, my solar abilities. That's where I'm focusing. So it doesn't honestly matter. I would say take your time, pick whatever mods that you want. The keys to this build aren't really mod-centric. Some are. This is just a very easy, basic, go-to, anybody can set it up kind of build. So if you've never tried it out, yeah, it's one I would recommend. It's the oldest original build that I've been using for years. It is still viable today, and it's still one of the stronger builds in the game, certainly for Warlock and Solar Warlock. But as we said, there are a few different ways you can tweak this to make it more powerful. It's a bit more hard to use. It takes a bit more practice, but it does actually make you even stronger. So we will showcase that in another upcoming build video. But guys, I hope you found that useful. If you haven't tried it out, definitely worth the time. Osteo is always good. It works well with any build, but because this build functions so heavily on the fire sprites and scorch spread, I do recommend any kind of weapon you have that is incandescent that can spread scorch. Maybe you have a crafted Mida mini tool, whatever the case may be. Anything that is incandescent is going to work extremely well and constantly have you proccing. So guys, that's the build. As always, I appreciate you checking in. If you have any questions, comments, want to throw anything my way, hey, I know this, maybe try this out, I'll be happy to try it out, let you know what I find. But until next time, guys, as always, I appreciate you checking in. We'll catch you on the next one.